everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for session 2 of our 3-part series, Accelerating Student Learning, Navigating Toward True Co-Teaching Practices. My name is Janelle Mercado, and I'm the project coordinator for supporting inclusive practices out of El Dorado County Office of Education. And on behalf of our executive director, Kristen Brooks, and director Kevin Schaefer, and our entire team, we are so thankful that you're here today and able to spend the afternoon with us. So for those who may have missed session 1, quick overview of the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. We're a technical assistance project funded by the California Department of Education out of Riverside and El Dorado County Offices of Education. We offer statewide technical support to educational communities in their pursuit of designing more inclusive and equitable schools. We want to thank the California Department of Education and our respective county offices for supporting us in the work that we do. To access any of our no-cost resources and professional learning, please visit our website at sipinclusion.org or follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and X at SIP Inclusion. So for those who did attend session 1, welcome back. And for those who might have missed it, we'd love to invite you to view a recorded version of session 1 on our resource Padlet, which is being dropped in the chat right now. Session 1 was dedicated to a system design and overview of co-teaching. And today's session is going to focus deeper on classroom practices. Today's session will also be recorded, and we have closed captioning available for anyone who is in need of closed captioning. We're also going to stop throughout today's session and capture questions that folks drop in the chat or the Q&A. So feel free to leave your questions there. We hope that this will be an interactive session. And with that, I'm going to quickly hand it over to Marilyn Friend, because she's the reason we're all here today, and we don't want to take up any more of her time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you everybody who's on and participating this afternoon. And I'll add my hope that if you missed the first session, that you will go back and take a look at it so that you know what we covered there. There will be almost no overlap, which is the point of this second session being on instructional practice. So here is what I think we are going to be covering this evening. Depends on your questions, but I'd like to be sure that we're all together on key elements of specially designed instruction, SDI, Foundation of Special Education in federal law, specially designed instruction. Then we're going to draw some distinctions. I was really asked as part of this series to address SDI versus differentiation, accommodation, modification. What do we have going on with UDL? Little bit about co-teacher roles and responsibilities, little bit. And then co-teachers other than special education teachers, and how this all looks in a co-taught class. A little video, some other photos of examples for you, and data collection that really has to be planned in order to be measuring it through this service delivery model. We'll see how much time we have on that. And now and throughout, what I'd really like to know is what's on your mind. What are the questions that you came hoping that we would address tonight? I'm sorry, it's going to happen. I'm starting at 6 p.m. on the East Coast. So yes, I know the difference between afternoon and evening, but bear with me. Would really like to hear what you're thinking. Would really like to have you type in the chat box if there's something from the last session that, as you think about it, you want more information or you have a follow-up question. All of that is fine. Janelle is monitoring that, and we will be sure to work your questions in. So, of course, in an increasingly complex world, sometimes old questions require new answers. And that's really what we're talking about in terms of SDI as part of co-teaching. Okay, last time I showed you a basket. That's the container, that's co-teaching. But what is inside of it? And we mentioned specially designed instruction. Tonight we say, all right, if we're talking specially designed instruction, what are its highlights? They are these. First, it must be based on not just IEP goals, but also student learning profiles that may give hints as to what would work with a student that isn't necessarily well captured in the IEP goals. Language processing speed. You know, what's the goal to speed up language processing? But that would have a profound impact on how we teach that student. So we've got to be careful to take a look at the obvious connections and the ones that may not be quite so obvious. If your school psychologists are now doing like cheat sheets where they can read through all the eval reports, and on the last page, they put, you know, based on this information, here are 10 ideas for teaching suggestions to address this student. That's a good thing. If that's not possible, can you touch base with your school psychologists? Okay, SDI, specially designed instruction, is the only universal special ed element. You know, other things like accommodations, modifications, related services, yeah, they're required if they're needed. But if a student does not need SDI, then the student shouldn't have an IEP. And that means SDI must be needed regardless of the setting, and especially including co-taught classes. A lot of criticism right now that when you have co-teaching, you lose any SDI. Not good. IDEA characterizes it as changes in content, methodology, or delivery, but that is all we get through federal law. There have been a few guidance documents, there have been state interpretations, the scholarly field has done a lot about it. I'll give you the best of what I have read and heard from those sources. Here's a key one. It has to be different from what all students need. If you can meet all of the requirements for a student's education within what is done for every student, the question legitimately is, all right, if that's the case, what does a student need? What does the student need an IEP for? And how are we delivering anything to this student? And I'll say that's like triply important in a co-taught class, okay? This is a primary responsibility for special ed teachers. Yes, they share it with their general ed partners. We'll talk a little bit about that. But this is the reason special ed teachers are employed. And so if they don't have SDI as a primary focus, especially when in a gen ed setting, I'm not sure why they're there. It is systematic, it is carefully planned, it is monitored. That means people know in advance what they're doing. They can document how they plan things out. They monitor with data collection. And I don't know, we have to be sure that the, oh, I make it up on the fly is not the pattern, because yeah, everybody makes things up on the fly once in a while, but specially designed instruction needs more structure than that. All right, I put this in because I always forget to say it. And I'll stop here in a second because I ran through that last slide lickety split. This is because we often get caught on academic domains. And we need to be sure that we are also addressing the fact that SDI cuts across all the other domains we look at related to kids with IEPs. And, you know, to give you a sense of that, there could be a kid who, if he did better socially or they did better socially, academics would be much less of an issue. Then in some situations, it may be the social skills are really the primary focus. That's okay. You know, not in my wheelhouse to dictate what SDI is and isn't in terms of domains affecting students. But it's sometimes important to look at this because some people get the impression that if it's not about academics, then it is not really SDI. I hope that helps at least a little bit. So that's quick and dirty. I need to stop for a second here because next I'm going to roll us right through what SDI is not. Janelle, do we have anything going on?
We just got a question in the chat. So the question says, how would you communicate this to general education teachers who believe they have to reach the test?
They have to reach what?
The test. So I think this is
Oh.
referring to, yeah, teach to the test. I think this is referring to state testing. And how would you communicate the need for specialized instruction?
One of the first things I would say, and this will come up when we talk roles, is that yes, all gen ed teachers are obligated to teach, quote unquote, to the test. Some take that literally, others take it in a broader understanding. And so, got it. No argument from me. However, SDI is not taught in a vacuum. The general curriculum is the basis for all of the instruction. SDI is layered on top of that curriculum and inserted where it's appropriate within that instruction so that it would be part of what the instruction is, not all the instruction for a certain group of kids. And if people find it's taking away, like seriously changing pacing, they really need to get someone else in to help them take a look to figure out how come that's happening. So I would explain it, and I'll add more with roles as a requirement, but not done in isolation. That's where I would start.
Yeah, and we predicted this question would come up. So Benjamin, thanks for honoring our predictions. The question, Marilyn, is how is SDI different from SAI?
Okay.
Yeah, SAI in California is our specialized academic instruction, which is primarily targeting the academic, behavioral, social, emotional learning.
Okay. And is that for students with IEPs or students without IEPs?
For students with IEPs.
Okay.
In California, it's a documented service.
All right. And so my question or my series of questions would be, if that is the intervention model for social, I think you said behavioral, emotional concerns, then that part of your SDI goes on for students who have that as a documented service. Am I guessing that is usually in a separate setting?
Not necessarily. It's to be determined by the IEP team.
Right.
Essentially, it's the services that would be provided by the education specialist specifically.
Okay. And the overlap there is comfortable. It's still specially designed instruction. It's highlighting those particular areas. Most other states, I think every other state, does not have that as a separate distinction. And so if a student is in a general ed setting and receiving that set of services, they can be provided in that setting, which would be preferred.
Mhm.
If a student is in a co-taught class, the student may not rise to the level of having that set of services designated, but still may need some things that are behavioral or social. And so is it a little muddy? Yeah, it is, but that's good. That's the way we roll in special ed. You know, we have as many options as we can because we want to meet the needs of all the kids.
Right, right. And for California folks online, the way that I would consider thinking about this is that SDI is that umbrella of services that encompasses specialized academic instruction, which is our SAI. It also encompasses occupational services, speech, etc. So for those of our California folks online, that's one distinction there, or way to connect the two.
Very fair question. And nothing about this contradicts what your services are. They all fit together very nicely.
Right.
Anything else as a question?
No, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, then let me do the next set of slides, next pieces, and then we'll stop and talk about these. A few minutes on what this is not. All right, this is not business as usual. I'm guessing that some general ed teachers, when they say that, you know, it's hard to fit this in, it's almost impossible, it's because they really believe that business as usual is effective. Well, if we're going to put two teachers in a room with very different expertise, we can't keep doing the same thing. My other comment on getting through the curriculum is I would ask what co-teaching looks like in those classrooms, because unless kids are constantly broken into pretty small groups for a variety of purposes, it's very hard to do these things. And so how groupings are set up also addresses this. Business as usual, this is not. Universal design for learning, very complementary, but they are not synonyms. And Janelle, you may end up wanting to weigh in on this as well because you're doing so much work in the area. What I would tell you is that a classroom that's deeply implementing universal design has only a few steps to go to ensure that SDI is also addressed. But depending on how universal design is implemented, it may be a few extra steps. Universal design is a framework that looks at all learners proactively to find the best way for the student, each student to learn, and really implements those practices. For students with the need for specially designed instruction, cool. A lot of that may overlap, but there's almost always a higher need for data collection, and it always has to be related back to IEP goals. And there is a legal lens for all of this in special ed that is not as visible through UDL. So there are some distinctions, but please don't spend time worrying about, is this UDL or is this SDI? They live very comfortably together. The better the universal design for learning, the less really radically different SDI will be needed. Now, you'll see that more when we get into examples. Janelle, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's perfect because when you look at the SDI, it actually helps our education specialists and related service providers become much more clear about what is specialized in alignment to an IEP versus the instruction that we're proactively designing that's accessible and available to all students. With
Yes.
learner variability in every student with an IEP in mind, then we're kind of like paving that way. So then what becomes specialized is truly specialized.
Yes. And again, we'll look at that more when we do some examples. All right, the next one. This is not help. Oh, I hear that so much. This is a great way for all the kids in a class to get help. Specially designed instruction is not help. It's just not. It is very technical. It is based on research. It is designed to address specific student needs. And people will say, oh, but I have to do all of this kind of on the fly. I don't have time to think about things. Everybody has a day like that, but we can't have a week, a month, or a semester or a year like that. We've got to have something that gets way beyond help offered in the moment. Okay. Now, here we go with our favorite term, differentiation. Okay, first of all, anybody in a leadership position, my request for you is to please don't use that term as a synonym for inclusion or for co-teaching or for specially designed instruction. My comment on differentiation is that it is usually the after the fact look at how to make things more accessible for kids. And it is a skill that's expected of every teacher in the 21st century. It's a condition of employment because, how many decades ago did we give up this notion that, kids are quiet, compliant, they all need and get the same thing? I mean, that's just so out of date. So differentiation is how everybody flies. That includes special educators. So not the same, not in any way, shape, or form. I call differentiation JGT, just good teaching. All right, here we go. Our favorite word, accommodation. You may consider accommodation a subset of the umbrella term, specially designed instruction. However, if all a student needs is accommodations, that student really is not entitled to an IEP. Then they would be entitled to a 504 plan because you realize we use the same term and they are in essence the same concept, but addressed through the lens of two very different laws. Accommodations are the tools provided to kids that enable them to work in school on a leveled playing field. So any of the things you know and love, like organizers, a graphic organizer for something they're reading, word banks, appropriate calculators, preferential seating, et cetera, et cetera. All of those are accommodations. That's good, but there are things we give kids. One important distinction I draw is that SDI is how we teach kids. And so students may get lots of accommodations, maybe more than they should, but how are they being taught differently? That usually helps draw the distinction between those two terms. Okay, then we have the ever so popular modification. Generally, modification is a term reserved to talk about students with extensive support needs who may have an aligned curriculum or entry points at the general curriculum. And modification, when the term is used related to students who have learning differences, like students who are other health impaired because they have ADHD, students who have learning disabilities, students who have mild intellectual disability, kids in those kinds of groups, they shouldn't, modification doesn't really, doesn't apply to them. And what I think people do is some local language just kind of either treats Accommodate and modify as one word. Oh yeah, we're used to doing that, accommodate and modify these kids. Or they're using the terms interchangeably. And we really need to be careful of that, because modify means taking something significant from the curricular standards. That is usually applied only to kids who have extensive support needs, very, very rare for other kids. Unless, I'm not picking on you, it happens sometimes, your IEP forms use that term the same way that accommodations are used. Now, let me do just a couple more. Oh, okay, took some out. Let me stop. Let me see if we've got questions on any of that.
Yes, Marilyn, it's a quick summary to just highlight a high-level overview of how accommodations and modifications are different from SDI.
Okay.
And I think you're going to get to that more in this next section.
Yeah.
But the question is specifically like, are these things that exist alongside SDI? And the answer is?
Okay, the answer is, it's okay with me if there is some overlap. And in California, if accommodate, modify are considered under the umbrella of SDI, I can live with that. But accommodate and modify, accommodations, modifications are never sufficient in and of themselves to justify an IEP for a student.
So in California, accommodations are listed in the IEP, and it is the IEP team decision to determine the modifications as well. And
But are
Mhm.
accommodations treated as the SDI or as something separate?
Something in addition. So that's where folks, Marilyn is going to get into some good examples of what is considered SDI, and that's where we start to unpack the differences between what are our accommodations, modifications to the curriculum, and true specialized instruction.
And right now, please just hang on to, generally, you don't really want modifications to occur unless kids are in the small percent of students who take an alternate assessment. There, it's special ed, there's always an exception to everything that's said, but by and large, that's who modifications are for. For kids with relatively high incidence disabilities, many kids on the autism spectrum, the kids with LD, the kids with dyslexia, I don't know where you are in that, the kids with LD, the kids who have an other health impairment for ADHD. For that group of kids, we talk about accommodations. Those are tools to provide access. And it's fine if it's part of their SDI, but accommodations in and of themselves cannot be all a kid needs on an IEP. Okay? Here we go, a summary of it, and then I'll come back to it, ask again if I haven't addressed it well enough. SDI is purposeful, so it is planned. If you went today and talked to special ed teachers, whether in your school, your district, through your agency, and just said to the special ed teachers, so kind of what's your plan for SDI for the spring? What would you hear back? It's purposeful. We all know plans get blown up once in a while, but we start with one. It's in addition to what all students receive. They may all learn a strategy, but then kids with IEPs get more review, more assessment, more practice. They memorize it, and they do things the other kids are not expected to do. Okay? It increases the intensity of instruction, which overall is what SDI is supposed to be doing, because if kids could do it with no changes, they wouldn't have IEPs. Okay, in a co-taught class, this is why the special educator is present. And so when people say, oh, well, we don't do that SDI stuff in the co-taught class, like, really? So how much of your day is spent co-teaching? Well, half. So half the school day, you don't do what you were employed to deliver? That's kind of a problem. Not mine to fix, but those are the biggest points to hold. All right. So I'm going to head into the roles and responsibilities, and this will start to raise more points. Ask questions. Your questions are excellent. I love them. So when we start talking about roles and responsibilities, we have to realize that this is one of the major shifts in culture that has to happen at a classroom level, a department or grade level, and a school level. And then it also has to occur at the district administration, because we've got to be sure everybody's talking it, everybody understands it, everybody's implementing it. All right. I promised I was going to summarize things tonight so that we could get through more topics. All right, gen ed teachers. They in a co-taught class know the grade level or the class curriculum. So whatever the core is, we expect them to have the proficiency. They know all the great ways to teach it. They are, they just have it. They're very proficient in what they were hired to do. They also do the overall classroom management, including positive discipline practices. I hope a lot of your schools use positive behavior supports or some version of that, so that the direction of classroom management heads toward the positive. The gen ed teacher should also know what's typical among kids in that grade level or in that class, and what their needs are likely to be. So, this has to cover diversity. It has to cover understanding post-pandemic. We have a lot more mental health issues than we used to. It includes the general ed teacher really deeply knowing that their job requires building relationships with kids, and they know all those factors that affect their relationships. The last thing they need to hold on to is pacing. We can be behind a day or two in a co-taught class. We cannot be behind a couple of weeks because there's no way to catch up. All right, that's gen ed. Here's special ed. Special ed must have the knowledge of and skills for delivery of specially designed instruction. They are the ones who should have a very good toolkit already. They're the ones who can go checking their favorite SDI websites so that they can find things if they have a student who's kind of a puzzle on this. That's their area to hold. They know their students one at a time. I like them to have a spreadsheet where they have a tab on each of their students. In co-teaching, could be arranged by co-teaching sections, all different ways, but they have at their fingertips information about their students, and they can really get at deepening their understanding and explaining the kids' needs to their general ed teacher. They also, as we all know, do all that special ed paperwork. And so we have to always think that they're not going to do exactly 50-50 planning and grading with a general ed colleague, because they have other dimensions of their jobs. Okay? Special ed also tends to be a mastery model of instruction, and they always head toward database strategies. An implication of that happens with the I wonder models of education, and we can talk about that a bit more. So, not right now, later on. Here's what you get. Basically, general educators, the specialists, and by the way, that says specialists because while teachers of students learning English are the second most common group to co-teach, in some places it's a big part of the program. And after kids get past a level 1, they're in co-taught classes and they receive their specialized instruction of language within a general ed setting. Places like doing that don't have a lot of bilingual education. You know, it's decisions that have made at a policy level within school districts and permitted by their state. The other group that I want to mention here is that special ed teachers, but also related services providers may co-teach. For many of them, it is unit-based or a skills-based. An exception sometimes is with speech language therapists in the primary grades. They may have a regular schedule of going into, whatever classrooms they can. But we also know that their caseloads are often very high. A district I worked in started co-teaching with related services people, and we're 4 years in, and that's just been a heavy lift, not because people don't like the idea, because they simply have too many kids to see. So you put both people there, and what you expect is that they will share some knowledge and skills. They will have large areas where they are different. If they overlap more, that's fine. But the trick and the most important part are 2 concepts. The goal for the educators is to have parity. It is not about equality. Parity meaning very technical sense, equally valued, not the same. And the other one kind of builds on that. We're also looking for role reciprocity, because it used to be, sometimes still is, that everybody gets all worried about the special educators learning the curriculum for the classrooms they're going to be in. And, if they're going to be there, especially as you move up through the grades, they really need to know the curriculum. Well, that's all well and good, but how often do you hear a conversation where special ed teachers are just railing that general ed teachers need to know SDI? They need to know how to participate in the delivery of that. What we are looking at now is a much greater level of role reciprocity, where special educators will need to be, knowledgeable enough that they can participate in a class. If it's something very foreign to them, then it may be that they start out by doing review lessons where they've already got a pretty good grasp. It may be their partner provides a few notes for them as needed, but we've got to see the general ed teacher saying, okay, you're talking about doing something with backward chaining. Could you explain what that is and tell me a little bit about what I should do? So that both teachers are learning from one another. They both become better teachers because of their partnership. And then we are good to go with a co-taught class. Janelle, I'm stopping again.
We have a question about para educators in the chat, in regards to providing SDI minutes. And I am looking up a resource that I think will also help answer some of this question, because this is quite a complex question. But I know
Yeah.
that you'll have some notes that you'll want to address there. So while I'm
Okay.
looking up that resource.
Okay, and I would just offer the comment that we really need to be careful with paraeducators. It is a complex topic, and paraeducators often are doing wonderful work with kids. Often they are assigned to a general ed setting, especially when it's not possible to get special educators into all the classes where there are kids. What we have to be careful of is that they are not being asked to go beyond their role description. In many places, they would not be initiating brand new SDI for kids unless clearly directed by and taught to do something, a particular technique, by the special educator. We have to also be careful with paraeducators that they don't become the person who deals with the kids who don't get it. And I'm being that raw in what I'm saying, because in some situations that does happen. And there's research demonstrating that in a large percent of classrooms with a general ed teacher and a para, the general ed teacher interacts with the kids with IEPs less than would happen if the para was not present. So there are ethical issues that get involved in this. Did you find what you were looking for, Janelle?
No, I am still searching. I'm gonna do my best, but this is a very complex, and I'd rather make sure that anything that we're putting out here is backed by some legal research.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to find just the right resource.
Okay.
And if I'm not able to find it, Cassie, I'll send you my direct email and we can see if I can dig something up after today's session.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to move on a little bit and try to show you some examples and applications of what it looks like when people are doing this in co-taught classrooms. That was a specific question asked after the last session. And so I want to be sure that we address that. This is where we're looking for the co-teacher mind meld. And that is one of my favorite co-teacher memes, I guess, because really we get people who get it. They understand their own roles, they get each other, and they really complement each other in the classroom. It's not that it's so much about we click. It's not a personality thing. Sometimes the great personality clicks are not necessarily the strongest co-teachers. It's when both professionals see a way to make kids' learning really be better by using this model. All right, so I'm going to do a couple of examples first with SDI. There are many, and these are just some. We're not doing anything with packaged programs tonight because those generally do not happen in a co-taught class. If you have people trained in Orton Gillingham, I know districts that are training all teachers in Orton Gillingham because there's a lot in there that can help lots of different learners. But usually packages or comprehensive programs are for separate settings. We can talk a little bit about macro SDI tonight and just a few specialized techniques. As we go through those, I will probably also try to just keep bringing up the notion of increased instructional intensity. And because that sometimes is part of SDI for certain kids. Now, if that's all the SDI, then the question is, show me how that relates to the IEP goal, how that relates to the measured performance of the kid, how that refers back to the data gathered about the kid. Just need to check that. Need to check it on all of these. So let's do one that is kind of specialized. It applies across a lot of grade levels. And so I'm going to do it and just raise it and see what you think. That is modeling special ed style. When I first say modeling, most people like roll their eyes and tell me about how they already do this. Well, the problem is a lot of modeling is not done the way a special educator should and can do it. Here's what it takes. First, it is thoughtful. I don't know any experienced teachers who script this, but they'll jot notes. There's certain things they want to be sure to address so that they're not just doing something cold. It's like, oh, it's my turn in front of the kids, show them what to do. It is modeling, not explanation. Oftentimes, people will call what they're doing modeling, but they'll say, now today we're going to practice going through some samples of essays that students have written, and we're going to highlight in a different color each part of the essay. For example, the first one I need to look for is the introductory sentence or the hypothesis. And so they're saying that, and then they say, okay, everybody, which sentence would that be? And so they're kind of showing, but they are also very definitely not showing. They're explaining. All right. For us, there are several kinds of modeling. For us, it's usually task or metacognitive. Task is when it would be a science lab. One teacher's talking through what the lab is, what the steps are. The other teacher is showing the steps. More common, used across all content areas, is metacognitive modeling, where kids need to learn how to talk themselves through what they are doing. Modeling should occur with 0 interruption. If kids don't get it the first time, it is done again. The problem with interruption is that as soon as a student asks a question, you lose another student who starts looking out the window, or a student who decides to dig in their backpack for something. Anytime you stop, something happens. Some kids will simply lose focus. They won't understand where they were and when things start again. You know, the question might have been a great question, but people usually teach kids this approach, and they do a couple of things. Let me tell you again in a second. They'll model again with kids participating. They'll provide feedback or scaffolds for kids, and then eventually they'll move toward independence, and they'll close with a summary. And so what could happen is that kids learn, when I say I'm going to model something for you, that means eyes on me, lips are quiet, and you're following along as closely as you can. Just some kind of simple instruction, varies by grade level. Then you use this kind of modeling, no interruption. Feedback, little more. And this is an example of something I decided not to do tonight, which is direct instruction, because direct instruction tends to be an I do, we do, you do model. And that's exactly what this modeling is. And so it's very much in line with the principles of direct instruction. All right, that's modeling. In a co-talk class, you can have one person talk and one do the actual, like writing on a paper or doing something like that on a chart. Often, they'll do one modeling example for the whole class and then divide kids based on the need. do they need a lot of scaffolds? Are they kind of done with that? Other people will model in parallel groups so that both teachers will begin with that pretty strict modeling approach. Then they'll open it up for more student input. And by having half the number of kids, they really can get through whatever example they're using for modeling fairly effectively. Sometimes people will use alternative teaching, that's a small group, at the beginning of a lesson or a class, and use that for pre-skills that the students will need. And those pre-skills are taught through modeling. I saw a very nice example of that in a California middle school, and the kids were just adorable. One kid said that he really liked when they had a chance to learn everything again, when they had a group that would come after the lesson. It's like, if you need just a little help, you want one of us around, come on over here. Very respectful. This kid said, when you teach me that stuff ahead of time, I don't need it afterwards. You gotta love it. Yep, that's why we do pre-skills. Okay, modeling also very easily can be a station, so that here's an example of where kids come through. Special educator does a modeling example, looks at what kids are doing, identifies several kids who get it, dismiss them so that they can go work on a project, whatever the independent work is, keeps the kids who need more practice, and continue with them until it's time to rotate stations again. And then the kids who had been dismissed rejoin their group. Lots of things you can do with station teaching. That's one. And some people actually, I wasn't going to put this in, and I don't really have time tonight to look at it, but some people use video modeling. If you work with kids with autism, that's pretty common. I don't find it common for other groups, but boy, having your modeling recorded so kids can go back and look at it as often as they would like, that can be a really nice tool for them. All right, that's one example. Ask a question about modeling. Janelle, do we have anything?
I'm not seeing any specific questions about modeling. Does anyone have any questions about this specific specialized instruction?
Nope.
Nope.
And I will move on.
We have other questions that I'll save for the end.
You might want to work those in, since you know how it will be when we're at the end.
It's more about how to get folks involved in a culture shift toward co-teaching. And I mentioned that this was deeply covered in the previous session. So if we have time to embed it through the rest of the session, that'd be great.
Okay, got it. I have a few slides that would help if I can get to them. Okay, self-regulated strategy development, SRSD. It's not special ed if there's not an acronym. Self-regulated strategy development has become a pillar of effective SDI in the late 20th and now through the 21st century. It is evidence-based learning strategies combined with teaching self-regulation that gives kids success. I'll take the two pieces apart. First, a little on learning strategies, then a little on self-regulation. So here are the strategies. There are many of these. This is one called WRAP. You can see it's got whiskers. It's been around so long, but this has been used with children in the primary grades all the way into high school. And the data on it are solid. Read a paragraph clearly, ask yourself main idea of point, paraphrase it. With younger kids, you say, put it into your own words. I see teachers take this and they may elaborate just a little bit. They may add a sentence, have to read a paragraph. If what they're reading is, a graphic novel, then it may be that it's read 2 pages and then. And, it's a way to help kids really focus on understanding what they're reading. I have seen it in a high school class, a literature class, where kids, when they have shorter samples of material, not whole novels, they will have like 2 paragraphs and then a line. And some kids, when they see that line, they're required to fill in, not sentences, just a couple of bullet points about what they remember about what they just read. Other students ignore the lines. It seems to work. I don't see kids questioning it. These are schools where the culture has been established. Okay, if you want something a little more detailed, Powtry is pretty common. See it a lot like in middle school to early high school. If you were doing younger kids, working with younger kids, you might do just the POW part and just teach POW and don't worry about the tree. Other kids, you might teach it all, but do it in segments. Again, lots of variation. It is an example for you. Here is something, trying to give you a math example. This is for kids when they are adding and subtracting fractions, unlike denominators, simplifying fractions, and converting fractions to mixed numbers. People will sometimes teach whichever part of this is appropriate. And as far as I can tell, there is nothing that leads you to say, if you don't do it all, it won't work. So there's another example. If you're teaching those kinds of strategies, here you go. There are 6 basic steps. You can find these. If you do a Google search on self-regulated strategy development, you will find these 6 steps everywhere. They are the ones that are supported by this. It is what the research says, and they are very, very common now. This has become really considered good classroom practice, especially in co-teaching. I am not going to go into every step because what you really want to do is spend enough time on each one that as kids gradually learn this, they have it memorized. You can see them writing it on the margins of their paper when they're using it. They know when to use it. And that could take, depending on the strategy, it could take 4, 5, 6 weeks. It could be that doing one in the fall, one in the spring is enough. Kids only learn 2 strategies. It all depends, and there's no exact correct amount. The mistake is when people are trying to teach a strategy almost every week. That's not what this is about. Strategies are most useful when they're taught deeply, mastered deeply, and become a tool for kids moving forward through education, post-secondary, whether that is vocational or community college or college, whatever it is, or employment. All right, but there's more. We also have to deal with self-regulation. And self-regulation, these are 4 commonly taught self-regulation skills. It's done in conjunction with the strategy you are teaching. It could start with just goal setting. I watched in a writing classroom where someone kind of got down close to a kid and whispered, "What is your goal for today?" And this kid said, "Yesterday I wrote a whole page Today, I'm going to write 2 pages. Now, you realize this was in a primary grade where maybe 8 or 10 words filled the whole page, but he was learning that the first way to help himself learn is to goal set. Self-monitoring, watched in a high school classroom. Kids had little tiny cheat sheets of what they were self-monitoring. And they did this manually. A special ed teacher would just walk by and tap their desk, and they would indicate whether or not they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. I also like noiseless cues that go off for kids. There are a lot of ways to do that. And it's simply to have a student determine whether they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And actually for this, you treat the kid as a success, even if the kid has a lot of not doing what I'm supposed to, like working on this project with my partner. But if the student recognizes that accurately, then you want to give the student credit for that. Self-instruction is how well is the student talking to himself or herself during the process of learning. I have a modeling example where it is middle school, and as the teacher is modeling, she says, this is so hard. I don't think I can do this. Wait, I know. Keep my mind free. I'll be okay. And people will criticize her for being negative about writing. And someone else almost always jumps in and says, yeah, but that's what kids say. They say, I can't do this. And so teaching kids how to talk themselves through that and give themselves some scripts to use really can help. That's self-instruction. Self-reinforcement, your goal is for kids to really verbally reinforce themselves. It's fine if you have a system set up where they get some type of an activity reward and they are able to accurately say, have I earned that? What you want to head for is kids who can just self-congratulate. I'm sure everybody on this, everybody involved in this, we all use self-reinforcement. You know, once I've written 2 pages, I will go have that dish of ice cream I've been craving. But we don't have to go there tonight. That is self-regulation. There are lots of others. Depending on what you're doing with SEL, you may be doing some of this. Can you get that tie between what's being taught as an SEL, kind of that sphere, and tie it to academic work and what needs to happen there? All right, another good place for me to stop just momentarily.
There aren't any questions in the chat right now, Marilyn, but I wanted to point out, and it's what you just said, right here, this screen and these self-regulation examples is a great connection to universal design for learning. These
Yes.
are excellent ways to leverage our special educators in the proactive design of instruction with the hope that then we're not doing as much retrofitting after the fact.
Yes, very true. And it's also, when you put it in that context, you can also see how what might be done for kids with IEPs might be just a bit beyond what you would do with UDL.
Right. And a great way to think about how to leverage the co-teaching models, pre-teaching yes. some of these, or having them taught into small groups. There is a question that just came in. So what does self-instruction look like beyond persevering or emotional regulation? Does it also involve academic self-regulation?
Usually what I see done has to do with the emotional side of this in terms of kids get frustrated. And the self-instruction should be, I know what to do. Here's the next step I know, therefore I can do it. And so that is part of it. But if you are referring to how well do kids recognize when they're missing a skill that they need, then I would say that that part of self-instruction for that student should include knowing when to ask a teacher or a peer for assistance. And that well fits within self-instruction. I don't know if I'm being responsive to that.
Yeah,
Yep.
I would say so.
All right.
Follow-up? We'll
Anybody else?
catch follow-up questions. Oh, yep, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. This is what happens when I'm skimming topics. So what we really have is that co-teaching is balancing the really good instruction and specially designed instruction. So we have core, if core is what you use in California for your term, and SDI. And with both people participating, each kind of leading the expertise on each of these, you get all of it pulled together and it's powerful. It is very powerful. There are some of my favorite teachers again, very powerful. Oop, wait a minute, let me go back. Okay, what I was going to do now, and that's why I put that back up there, is show you a 3-minute segment, little over 3 minutes, on co-teaching. This is video that I had permission to video the kids. It took months to get the permission, and the classrooms look small because, have you ever tried to get permissions? Half the kids don't bring it back, and we can't video unless we have the permissions. So we'll show this. It's only 3 minutes or so. Then we can look at applying it and some other ways to make it really work. Here we go. Let's see what happens.
There are 6 co-teaching approaches. They are one teach, one observe, station teaching, parallel teaching, alternative teaching, teaming, and one teach, one assist. In one teach, one observe, one teacher leads the entire group in the instruction, while the other teacher gathers data about one student, a group of students, or even the entire class. One teach, one observe implies that each teacher has the opportunity to gather data and each teacher leads instruction. This approach to co-teaching really can be led by the special educator, since this group of professionals often knows an awful lot about data collection.
Good job. Go ahead and start your station.
In station teaching, the fundamental approach is that students are in 3 groups. Each teacher leads one of the groups, and the third group is working independently. The students rotate from group to group. The hallmark of this approach is that each teacher will interact with each student in the class at some point during the instruction. What we're going to do is, in parallel teaching, the students are divided into 2 parts. Sometimes that might be based on their skills or their needs. Sometimes it's simply to divide the groups heterogeneously. Each group is doing either the same instruction as when they do a review for a test. By running it twice, each group gets more chance to respond and the instruction is intensified. But parallel teaching can also be used when the teachers want to show students 2 points of view, or maybe when they want the instruction to occur at 2 different levels. In alternative teaching, the larger group of students is doing one activity while the smaller group does something else. Perhaps 6 students need a review of a core concept. Perhaps the teachers would like to assess students in a small group. Maybe they're doing pre-teaching, where one teacher prepares students for upcoming instruction while the other students might be doing a review activity. Teaming is what teachers refer to as one brain and 2 bodies. In this approach, the 2 teachers equally share the instruction. It's important that when they're doing this, they really dig deep to make it more than just 2 talking heads, so that they may take on roles and act out different characters. They may debate with each other. At least they make the classroom much more animated. One teach, one assist is a co-teaching approach that should have limited use. In this approach, one teacher is leading the large group, while the other teacher circulates around the room, helping individual students, maybe helping redirect their attention. The concern is that too much co-teaching relies on this approach, and it should never be the primary type of co-teaching in any classroom.
All right, that's a quick overview. And I'm presuming most of you can sing right along with the 6 approaches. There they are. But the update is that we don't talk about them quite like that anymore. What we do is now talk high use approaches versus limited use approaches. And if you look at what's in each list, the high use approaches have both teachers in active teaching roles and students are in smaller groups than whole class. All 3 of them. And what happens when you do that is that you are able to do all these different things I'm talking about that are SDI. If we use whole group instruction, it becomes almost impossible. Teaming, once in a while when people want to share an idea or share something they found, that's okay, or they can act something out. And one teach, one assist, very limited use, and it's done with just a touch here and there. It's okay. One teach, one observe, very valuable, but you don't want to be doing a huge amount of that because, yeah, you have to do some, but you want to be both people teaching. So if you're working with folks on this, focus on the high use ones. And here are just a few things that can be done. First, instead of 3 groups, if people are uncomfortable with this, they could start with 2 groups. They could start with kids not moving, and they could have the teachers switch groups rather than the kids move around. That works very nicely. You can also do these kinds of things. You can see your group assignments. There's for the little kids. They use that for parallel and stations. That's for the middle school. They use that too for parallel and stations. And yes, here's the same thing for high school, parallel and stations. They don't want to use their projectors for this because they want to use those for teaching. So they have something set up in the high school. Kids walk by this when they enter the room, and they are expected to be in their place and to be doing what they're supposed to be doing when the bell rings. Kids do all the desk moving. This is a high school district. It has done just spectacular things with co-teaching. All right. Then here's a station option. Little kids again. You see they have their Venn diagram, but they use it for their groups. When you come into the room, what you see is this classroom. And then if you keep looking, you'll see that the divider actually hides a 3rd little area. So whenever they do stations, they have some kids kind of partition. It gives them a little more of a sense of, not quite as distracting in the classroom, just creative people. And this is in case you're wondering where some of this is from, The video and some of these shots are from the Charlotte Mecklenburg schools, certainly nowhere near as big as your largest district, but by all means urban, and certainly, you know, not a place where co-teaching would be really easy if we could get all the pieces in place. These people work hard and they make it work. This is an example of an independent station where the teachers did it with QR codes. They said it took like 5 minutes to set that up, and the kids love using the QR codes. They can't take anything up with them when they look at the clues because they want the kids to talk with a partner, figure out that they know what to do next, and then go back and try to do it. So no just copying. That works very nicely. All right, and here is an example of a well-designed independent station. You'll see it's called that up at the top. It says independent. They've got slope. They're doing rise and run. They're doing mathematical calculations. They have to do quizzes, and that is how they keep the kids accountable. And they did something very important. If you're finished early, check Unit 5 homework. Number 3, answers are on Canvas. So lots to do, very well organized. And the kicker is kids are never just left wondering what to do. One more picture for stations and parallel. This is a hand-me-down monitor. Someone had this giant monitor. Teacher said, we'll take that. And they now have a second place for students to work. And they said that the kids actually like this arrangement because they kind of huddle up close and they feel like it's, I don't know, just for them. And so they're finding that their secondhand monitor is very effective. All right, little bit on just parallel teaching. Some people find that a sight and sound barrier is really helpful. And if you don't have a sight and sound barrier, you might figure out if you can make one using, you know, a whiteboard on wheels. If there is some kind of a folding divider you can use. People talk about noise in parallel teaching. They usually get over it after a while, but in the interim, a sight and sound barrier can help. This is also something used in both parallel and station teaching, but I thought I would raise it with parallel. These teachers were asked where to mount their new fancy dancy Apple TV. And these two teachers, they co-teach, they like co-teaching. They said, no, wait, give it to us on a portable stand so that we can move it around where we want it. But wait, don't take our old projection equipment. So they now have 2 sets of technology and they take turns who gets what, because of course the Apple TV is all the rage. And they're doing a very nice job, parallel and stations. Now, alternative teaching, I have one quick example for you. This is a classroom where they do lots and lots of group work. Here is today's example, tons of variation. See how Leo is the resource manager? He's the one upside down for us. Okay, there are like 8 groups of 4 in this classroom. Everyone has all 4 kids and their role for the day. So every set of 4 has a resource manager and a kid. They say to the group, the other kids are told what to do to get started, but resource managers, we need you over here in the corner. That day, the kids had been strategically arranged so that the resource managers were all kids who didn't quite grasp everything they were being taught. So when they went over in the corner with the person who was going to talk to them about their job today, they got a review, as you can see, on transformations. They had the little corrugated cardboard color-coded triangle to show them the different aspects of it and what moved and what didn't. They practiced using that, and they were reminded it's really important that when you go back to your group, you explain this to everyone, just so you're all sure. This is called brilliant. The kids didn't know why they were the resource managers. They all thought it was an assigned task, and it was. It gave them a little pre-teaching, and then what were they going to do? Go right back and use it with their peers. And so it was a great way to teach the kids. Very, very, very good quality co-teaching. Now, one teach, one observe, teaming, and one teach, one assist are not approaches we really want to emphasize. We want one teach, one assist, I would tell you, should be less than, well, 10% or less than all of the co-teaching time available to any partnership. I would tell you one teach, one observe. If things are going pretty well, it's probably no more than 5, maybe 10, depending on how much IEP data collection has to happen. Could be a little higher if there's a kid on a behavior intervention plan, because then that kid might need more data points. So, you know, it's not to interfere with teaching. And teaming, boy, if you're in high school, if you get that to 20% or so, I'll live with it. I would like it to be even a little bit lower. And if you are teaming, to use it for a specific purpose. 2 different points of view. Use it for different characters in a piece of literature. Use it for 2 different ways to solve for certain variables in math. So there are ways to use it, but it should be only for one of those specific purposes. Sometimes I see teaming, and it looks to me like it's because the planning hasn't happened, and so there are not lots of small group arrangements. And teaming's not a reason. It's not okay just because you haven't had a chance to plan. All right, I need to stop there again and see where we are.
We do have 2 really great questions in the chat.
All right.
So one is specifically targeting special education teachers. Are they able to teach new content to all students? Or do you recommend that the special educators specifically focusing on SDI in a co-taught class?
That depends completely on the special educators, their knowledge base, their credentialing, and their comfort level. I am in many classrooms where the first year, especially at high school, when the special educator does not have the content background, that they would probably do more like dual stations where gen ed teachers doing the new content, special educator is doing skill checks, pre-skills with some kids, reviewing things, and then they switch. So the gen ed teacher does most of the new teaching. As people get comfortable, like the classroom I showed you where they had it was actually an Algebra 2 class, and we had that pretty Apple TV. They've been co-teaching for 4 or 5 years. The special educator has no background as a math educator, but she's seen it enough that she's very comfortable, and they're comfortable with their shared arrangement. So little bit of it depends. If to get people moving, they want to start that way, then have them start once a week with stations. When it's for review, you do part of the review, I'll do the other part. The 2 of us will switch sides, repeat. We both taught, the kids have seen us as teachers, we're good to go. and then build from there. Good question. Fair enough.
Great question. Another question is specifically looking at how to make it work, make some of the co-teaching models work when you have a really large class size. So many classes in California are around 35 students, potentially 18 students with IEPs. Any suggestions on how to get into those smaller groups?
Yeah. This is where I would also say, try simple first. Try for parallel. Make sure the two teachers are not backs against opposite walls where they're talking at each other. Think carefully about where to put the teachers so that they can direct their voices toward the wall that's nearest to them. It usually means one standing toward the front of the room, facing one wall, and the kids will kind of look over their shoulders a little bit, but they'll step to the front when they need to point to whatever they're using, boards or projectors or whatever. And the other person at the back of the room angling toward that opposite wall. That can help a lot. Better yet, large groups, teachers cozy kids up around them in two groups, and teachers sit for most of their teaching. It really helps on noise. It seems to work pretty well. Kids lower their voices and we're good to go. So I'd still try two groups instead of three. If you have space, if you've got 35 kids and there is space immediately outside the classroom, I might give you permission to have a group right outside the classroom, as long as kids are rotating through that just like they're rotating through all the other groups. But what you can't do is end up in two completely different places, because then you don't know what each other is doing. Causes problems. So that's my best reasoning for you. Worst class I ever saw was in your state. There were 45 kids in a classroom, probably built for 24 kids who were a lot smaller. And everybody had to stand up when a guest came in because they had to scooch over to make enough room for me to walk from the back of the room where the door was to the front. I gave them like my blessing on pulling kids out into like the vestibule. But for most people, I'd say experiment, invite someone in to observe, not to judge what you're doing, but to say, you know, I was thinking this might work, and get other opinions on how to do some setup. That can help a huge amount. That's it on that for now. Do we have one more?
We do have one more, and I think it can be covered in the next minute. In small schools, where you may only have one ed specialist covering multiple grades, any recommendations on what SDI could look like in those sort of circumstances?
Well, what I usually find is when you have one person, are you talking like one person covering an elementary?
Yeah.
Or the school? Yeah. Then I think you have to be very realistic. I would tell you, I would probably start co-teaching probably at around third grade and focus more on third. If they go third, fourth, fifth, you know, I don't know what the breakout is for the different school levels, but if you're doing something like that, starting at about third grade works. Many people are saying that for K1 and 2, if you can do those really high quality, short, intensive phonics-based reading instructional groups with kids, that'll give them the basis that they then can move to co-teaching. But when you get to third grade, you got to start worrying a lot about missing content. And so we want to push co-teaching a lot by that point.
Great. One last question is just,
All right.
do you have a recommendation for the best co-teaching model in an online learning space?
Oh, a colleague of mine did research on that started before the pandemic. And I think we all found this out during the pandemic. In an online course, the true co-teachers end up being parents.
Mm.
And it gets really tough to break the pattern using breakout rooms. If it is a truly, like if it is an online course with kids with and without disabilities, if it is only kids with disabilities in the online class, then you might do some things with breakout groups and go in and out of them. But then I would tell you we need a whole conversation on how to help parents get ready for this and help it be effective.
Well,
Sorry, that's fun, but it's true.
That's okay. That's what we appreciate so much. I want to give you, we are at time, and I want to just give you some notes that were left in the chat for you. Marilyn, is just thank you for your many, many years of experience. The pictures, the videos, the examples were incredibly helpful for folks on the line tonight. And I wanted to invite everyone back for session number 3 next week on the 20th. Same time, we're going to be meeting with Dr. Paula Kluth, who will talk more about classroom strategies and specifically supporting students with extensive support needs. So with that, thank you, Marilyn, friend, for all of your expertise. You really brought us the best of the best, and we appreciate you.
Thanks very much for that. And if you have follow-up questions, please use your SIP resources. And if you have one, you can also run it by me. That would be just fine. Happy Mardi Gras, everybody. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Thank you, thank you. And we have dropped a link in the chat to our website. So if you have any other questions specifically for SIP or about co-teaching, please reach out to us. We'll make sure to get your questions answered as well. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.